On April 3rd, 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King made a speech in Memphis, Tennessee that has become famous as his mountaintop speech because he gave it the night before he was assassinated. Dr. King ended his speech with these words: "Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as people will get to the promised land." As the leader of the freedom movement for Blacks in the United States, Dr. King was called to speak truth to power and to stand against violence and injustice. The reason that Dr. King could lead so powerfully and stand against the violence that was brought against him and those fighting for civil rights was because he had met God personally and knew that God was leading God's people in their efforts. Dr. King referred to his own mountaintop experience because he knew that there were other experiences in the Bible like his. In today's story, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John on a long hike to the top of a mountain. And Peter and James and John had become used to Jesus taking time away to pray and to rest from his work of healing, teaching, and leading. But this time was different. As Jesus was standing there, Elijah and Moses appeared and talked with Jesus. Now, we don't have a record of what Elijah and Moses discussed with Jesus. What we do know is that, as Dr. King reminds us, Moses encountered God and was called to lead his people from slavery to freedom. Elijah, God's prophet who directly took on kings and queens and the prophets of Baal and Asherah in an amazing competition over the power of their gods versus Yahweh, did not shrink from speaking truth to power. Our first reading told of Elijah's disappearance into heaven, watched by Elisha. What is amazing to me about that story is that when Elijah asked Elisha what gift he wanted, Elisha responded, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." What a great ask. And God gave Elisha that blessing. In contrast to Elisha, we have Peter, whose response to witnessing Jesus transfigured before them so that his clothes dazzled was to try to find ways for them to stay there on that mountaintop for as long as possible. But the words that came from heaven were, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Not stay here and worship him, but listen to him as he teaches you and trains you to be leaders for a real future, a future that cries out for justice and mercy for all. Dr. King said it this way: "It's all right to talk about long white robes over yonder and all of its symbolism, but ultimately people want some suits and dresses and shoes to wear down here. It's all right to talk about streets flowing with milk and honey, but God has commanded us to be concerned about the slums down here and his children who can't eat 3 square meals a day. It's all right to talk about the New Jerusalem, but one day God's preacher must talk about the new New York, the new Atlanta, the new Philadelphia, the new Los Angeles, the new Memphis, Tennessee. This is what we have to do." The good news is that God meets us where we are so that we can do what God needs us to do. Elijah, Moses, and Peter were called by God to serve in their time with their people. Dr. King, you and I are called to serve where and how we can. Sometimes, like Peter, we get mountaintop experiences which are so full of awe that we don't want to come down to reality. Sometimes, like Moses and Dr. King, we get to see a bright future without being able to enter it. Sometimes, like Elisha, we get to receive a double portion of blessing from our elders as they pass their legacy on to us. Whatever our experiences, we are being called by God to be God's presence in our world today. Like Dr. King, let our goal be to say, "I just want to do God's will." Let that be the best experience we can have in our life. Amen.